to now start the process of shaping the dough. I wanted to include a couple details that I might have missed last time about how long should you wait in between each stretch and fold. Usually about a half an hour is fine. If it goes longer, that's no big deal. You just don't want to go shorter than that. You won't give the dough time to rise, and it is good to leave the dough in a warm spot while it's in between the shaping. So you can use the trick of turning the oven on to 350 for 1 minute, turning it off, don't forget that, and then putting your dough in the warmish oven to do the time in between the stretching and folding. So here's what the dough looks like now. It's a little bit billowy. It looks good. You can see air pockets if you were close up. And what we're gonna do now is turn the dough out onto the counter, divide it in two and shape it. There are different ways to do this. You could put flour down on your surface. I used to do it that way and I don't anymore. Sometimes it just depends on your surface, but mostly it just depends on your shaping technique and what you're comfortable with. So I tend to use some water now instead of the flour, but do what you're comfortable with and what you think works for you. I think I said in the first video, or maybe it was the second, I remember, that shaping is a little bit personal, and the best thing to remember is that what you're trying to do is shape the loaf into something round or potentially something kind of oblong, but that you're wanting to have a taut side and then all the seams on the other side. So seams on one side and then a smooth taut side. And that tension in the dough is kind of what makes it hold its shape. It's how it works. Well, I'm talking too much. Let's just get it going. So I'm gonna just get it out. Onto the counter. And now this is where you use your dough scraper, or your bench scraper, I think is what it's called, to divide the dough in half. If you don't have a bench scraper, you could do this with a knife, which would probably work the best as a knife. And then there's two different shaping. You shape it twice. This one's called the pre-shape, what I'm doing right now, and then in a half an hour, you do the final shape, which is when you put them in these containers, or a bowl if you have it that's lined. Sometimes, I just want to tell you, sometimes I skip that. What I mean by that is I only do one shaping. I just do the final shape right from the get-go if I'm in a hurry, or if for some reason I just don't want to take that step. And your results are really, at least what I have found is that it works pretty okay. I sometimes can't tell any difference at all. But if you're just starting, you may want to just do everything as the recipe states. And the method that I've mainly been using is Tartine's method. I got those cookbooks out. I don't know where I put them. I'll show them to you later. So here's what you're gonna do. You kind of have this blob here. You're basically going to just be folding the dough onto itself. So I folded it in half. Some people kind of like fold it in quarters, but you're stretching it and you're folding it onto itself, either direction. It doesn't really matter. So you can see already, look how tall and just kind of billowy it is. Even that would probably be good enough to just leave it for a pre-shape and just set it there and leave it. I tend to work with it a little more and do this sort of rolling technique. The point is you want the seams down, and it's not really sticking very much. It's billowy, it's holding its shape. Yours might feel much flatter, stickier, because if you're new to this, that just might be what happens. Don't be too discouraged. And you might want flour down so that it doesn't stick. I find that it works just as well and maybe better not to use the flour, which is kind of new for me. I've only not used flour for maybe like a few months. But I have started to do this kind of rolling technique to do it, and I really like that technique. My hands are a little messy, but not very. And I just put water on them before I started. So this is the pre-shape. That looks good. Seams are down. It's sort of shaped. It's a little bit taut on the top. And then what you would do is you could just put a little flour on top and cover them. I don't have any flour real nearby because my daughter's using it for another baking project. But when I get off this, I'll put a little flour on top, cover them, and then come back in 20 or 30 minutes to do the final shape and putting them in the bowls. Okay, so now we're on to our final shape. So come look at the dough that's been resting. It's flattened a little bit, but it's not too bad. So I want to just give you some ideas about methods or ways to shape the dough besides just kind of doing what I did, which is sort of rolling it and then getting the seam on the bottom. So I said before that this is helpful, but you don't need it. One thing you could use if you don't have something like that is you could cut the top of a lid, a plastic lid, and turn it into a kind of a flexible scraper. This is a Sweet Martha's cookie jar lid that I cut out many years ago, and it works as a great tool, but it would work well for the shaping, because sometimes the way people shape is they'll take their bench scraper, and what I'm saying is you could use this, and they will use it to sort of get the seams down because the bench scraper doesn't stick as much as the dough. So you see how it's keeping the top tight and it's kind of getting the seams down. So if you wanted to use something that wasn't a bench scraper, you could use a plastic lid. It's not as strong, but it'd work for you in a pinch. So already you can see that one's shaped better. If you come close, I wonder if you can see this, like the little bubbles here everywhere. So that's a good sign that it's billowy, it's full of air. So if you didn't want to use that to shape it with the bench scraper, you can use your hands. And here I'm doing this sort of rolling method. There's another method that is probably the most common one that people talk about, which is one where you put the dough down and then you kind of fold it. Mine is staying together really nicely. That doesn't always happen. But what you do is you sew the bread, and basically you fold it like this, and then you fold it this way into like 4 folds, and then on the second in fold, you sew the bread like this, and you create a seam. So you see my seam, and you see how it's holding together. I did that method for a long time, and what you would do is you would pick it up like this, keep the seam side up, and drop it in with the seam up, okay? I prefer to either use the scraper rather than the sewing, or to use this little bit of a rolling method. The only bad thing about the rolling method is it leaves you these kind of seams here on the sides, so that it, but if you can get rid of those pretty easily just by pinching them and pushing them under, and then you're good to go. So like I would say that's a nice round shape. It's ready to go in. So here's my round bowl lined with a tea towel, and you just want to put some rice flour in it so it doesn't stick. Now, all the experts will tell you you want to mix half rice flour, half wheat flour together so that you've got 50-50 of rice flour and wheat flour to line your things. I don't do that. I just use the rice flour, and it's for artistic reasons. The rice flour is a nice, bright white color, which when you go to score then creates a better canvas for your design. And rice flour does not taste like anything. It will do nothing to the taste or flavor of your bread. So there's nothing to worry about that way. The easiest way to put this in, and you want to put it this taut side down. So you're going to flip it over like that so that the seam is down. Shh, it's raining?
Yes.
Awesome. We're taking a video, bud. So now it's in, so you just cover it like this, and what I would do is get a plastic bag from under my sink, like this one, and I just put mine in a plastic bag like this. You don't even have to. You could not use the plastic bag. I do. And then it will go in the fridge. It could stay in the fridge overnight. It could stay in the fridge 2 nights. It could stay in the fridge for 3 hours, and then I could bring it out and bake it. I do think it really helps to have it in the fridge for a while. I just used my hands that time. It worked fine. A lot of times people only use a bench scraper. And then again, this can just go in a plastic bag in the fridge until we're ready to bake it.